Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. This November marked the 50th anniversary of the White Album, possibly the most important album in the history of popular music. And to celebrate, Applecore and I teamed up to pay tribute to the Beatles' greatest accomplishment by looking at one of the best songs off that album, George Harrison's Well My Guitar Gently Weeps. It starts like this. And while there's definitely some interesting chords going on, this section feels almost completely built around the bass. It's playing this simple, powerful descending line. And honestly, it almost doesn't matter what chords they play on top of it. Any way you harmonize this line will probably sound good because the slide down the scale provides enough structure on its own to hold the entire progression together. But there are chords, of course, so let's talk about them. This section reminds me of a device called a line cliché, which is where the harmony stays pretty much the same except for one rogue line that slowly drifts up or down. Basically, we start on A minor, then the root slowly falls down while the rest of it holds still. It's not quite a traditional line cliché though. First of all, normally the changing line moves a half step at a time, but here we go straight from A to G, skipping right past G sharp in the process. Why? Well, this accomplishes two things. First, the options for harmonizing the G sharp aren't great. Traditionally, this part of a line cliché plays A minor major 7, which is a fairly dissonant chord, so skipping it helps keep the section from sounding too jagged. And second, it lets you walk down a bit further in the same 4 bars. Usually a minor line cliché would end on F sharp half diminished, but by skipping the G sharp chord we make room for F major, which is a nicer sound. The other difference between this and a normal line cliché is that the rest of the harmony doesn't actually sit still. If they did, it'd sound like this. Which is still pretty good, but it's not what they're doing. The first two chords are the same, but after that the harmony gets restless and starts moving around, so instead of F sharp half diminished, we get D9, and instead of F major 7, we get an F major triad. I still feel comfortable analyzing it as a line cliché because the A and C stay in the same place the whole time, but the slight variations add a bunch of extra color to it. Still though, I think this thing is pretty much just an elaborated A minor chord. There's a sense of motion created by the line cliché, but it's not actually moving very much. In the second half of the progression though, that changes. Here we have a pretty straightforward example of functional harmony, which, as we've mentioned before, is the idea that different chords in a key have different functions or jobs to do. We start on the 1 chord, which has tonic function, meaning it provides a sense of rest. Then we go to the flat 7, which here I think has subdominant function, meaning it adds instability to take you away. The 4 chord is interesting here. It has subdominant function too, but more importantly, it's major. Normally, we'd expect to see D minor here, and the use of a major 4 chord implies that we may be in a scale called Dorian, which is like minor, but a little bit brighter because it has a raised 6th note. Maybe this choice signals a bit of hopefulness on the part of the narrator. Anyway, after that we see the 5 chord, which has dominant function, meaning it points us back to the 1 chord and the progression starts all over. So what we've got is a long, largely static section where the harmony is pretty much sitting still, followed by a section of fairly rapid, powerful motion. That's cool and all, but in order to really understand how great this progression is, I think we need to look at the lyrics happening on top of it. Each lyrical phrase can be broken up into 2 parts. The first is something like, I look at you all and I see the love sleeping. Here, Harrison is passively observing a status quo. The world is turning, the floor needs sweeping, etc. This plays over the line cliché and nothing is really happening. The second part though is the Well My Guitar Gently Weeps, which is an active expression of emotion. He's taking a stand, and when he does, the harmony starts moving. It's amazing. There's also a slight variation that happens. For the second half of the verse, we get the same line cliché, but in the functional section, we get this instead. Obviously, the bass picks up at the end, building energy and momentum towards the chorus, but that's not the important part here. What I want to talk about is this C major. This is still basically functional. It's the flat 3 chord whose job is a bit ambiguous, but it definitely can be subdominant. But more importantly, it's replacing the D major, which was a symbol of brightness and hope, with something more native to the minor scale. It also makes the move to E major sound bigger because the 2 chords have what's called a chromatic mediant relationship, which means they're a third apart, but they don't share as many notes as we'd expect. Specifically, C major has a G, but when we go to E major, it slides up to a G sharp, increasing the sense of resolution when we finally land on A. Anyway, after that we move into the chorus, where we've apparently switched to A major. This is what's called a parallel modulation, where you keep the same root but change the scale you're using. Normally a switch to major would feel happy and uplifting, but I'm not really getting that here. This feels more anxious, and I think that's because despite being in a major key, the section is still chock full of minor chords, and the melody revolves around C sharp, the third, instead of A, the root. As for functions though, we start on the 1 chord, which is tonic, then go to 3 minor, which is tonic, then 6 minor, which is tonic, then back to 3 minor, which is still tonic. Yeah, the whole section is just one function, which means that much like the line cliche in the verse, these 4 bars are basically an elaborated version of the 1 chord. It's static harmony created through functional techniques, almost like a synthesis of the 2 verse parts. After that, we get this, which is, again, much easier to explain. We start on 2 minor, which is subdominant. We sit on that for 2 bars, then go to the 5 chord, which, as always, is dominant. That bass walk-up adds a little extra tension, which makes the inevitable resolution even stronger. This section also moves slower than the verse. The tempo doesn't really change, of course, but the harmonic rhythm does, and we sit on each chord for longer before moving on. We're drawing the harmony out, giving each chord a chance to breathe and letting the audience really absorb each function on its own. But there's one last thing I want to talk about in the chorus, the vocals. Harrison double-tracked his voice, and he sang the chorus slightly different each time. This sort of texture, where you have the same melody being sung with different embellishments at the same time, is called heterophony, and it's pretty rare in Western music. It's much more common in the classical traditions of places like Thailand and the Middle East. But it's doing more than just creating an interesting feel here. It's telling a story. You see, this song is generally believed to be about Harrison's frustration with a growing tension within the band. They were drifting apart, each starting to go off in their own artistic direction, and here that's represented by a vocal line that can't even stay in sync with itself. The 2 versions of the melody can't quite agree on what exactly they're supposed to sound like, which is an absolutely brilliant compositional metaphor for the Beatles themselves at the time of the White Album. I love it so much. It's so good. Anyway, that's pretty much it. The only other section is the guitar solo played by Eric Clapton, which is over the verse progression. Clapton was initially hesitant to record on a Beatles song since it was so rare that they featured a soloist from outside the band, and even after Harrison convinced him, he requested that his guitar be mixed to sound as Beatlesy as possible so it wouldn't stand out. That's not super relevant to the analysis, but it's a fun story, so I thought I'd share. Oh, and one last thing before I go. In addition to this video, Applecore also sponsored my friends in the band Airplane Mode to record a cover of the song, so if you want to hear a more modern take on it, there's a link to that in the description. I consulted a bit on the arrangement, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I think it turned out really cool. It does what I think every good cover should do: identify the heart of the song and then change everything else. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for making these videos possible. If you want to help pick the next song we analyze, just head on over to Patreon and pledge at any level. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.